Rachel? Or Cadence? Yes. Let's be a little more generic. Too generic. But yes, that's another thing. Okay, ups and downs of the economy. We had expansion, peak, trough, recession. Were the 4 phases of the business cycle. In general, what is it? GDP over time. Simple way to think about it is we're just mapping out gross domestic product over time. Now, the twist we put on it last time is that we want to separate out the price effect and the quantity effect. So we got to get our P's and Q's straight. So when we're thinking about how you value the things in your life, the stuff that you can buy, the thing that makes you happy is the thing, not the price of the thing, right? Actually having the thing and being able to play with your phone or whatever the gizmo is, that's where kind of welfare or your well-being is generated, is from the thing itself. And so what we uncovered last time was GDP can rise and fall when prices change or quantities change. And the only thing we truly want to see is quantities changing. Prosperity or the well-being of our nation is dependent upon those things more so than it is the prices of those things. And again, I already talked about last time, there's more to life than just these things that we have, although we seem to be focused too much on things, but that's a whole different philosophical talk we can have either in other classes, although I like to talk about it in here too because it's important. But the GDP gives us something that's fairly measurable and quantifiable. I think I maybe mentioned that economists are working on other measures of well-being. One of them is happiness. They are tracking there's been a happiness index through survey data that's been experimented with on and off, for the most part in the last 10 years. And they're thinking about making this now one of the statistically monitored measures of the economy. Right along with GDP, we're going to have this happiness index and see and have that as another variable that we track. So we want to use these variables to try to get indications about what's going on and what the true prosperity is. So GDP and all its drawbacks has been one that's been focused on over the years because it has been fairly measurable and quantifiable. All right, so what we didn't do last time was showing that price. So we're going to create kind of an artificial index called the price level. I'll define it later. I just want to put a P subscript L, the price level or the price index. And this thing is just a ratio of these two things we computed already. So remember, nominal GDP now was the word that we give to the dollar value of all final goods and services measured in terms of the prices and quantities for that year, the current year. Real GDP was the dollar value of those goods and services measured in terms of a base year's price. So we fixed out that price effect and got real GDP. So the index now is going to be the ratio of nominal GDP over real GDP. And then we're going to multiply that times 100. So let's go ahead and calculate these numbers and then we'll talk about them. So let's stay in the same thing as our rows here. Row 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 1. Calculate what this number is for me, called the price level for each one of these years. 3 is 100. Good. We have somebody that's paying attention. That one is the easy one. The rest of them are going to probably take some calculator action. Go ahead. As soon as you get an answer, spit it out. Tell me what year. 4 is 103.5. 73.6. 119. This is 5, right? 0.76? Okay. And how about a 6? 130. And we're still missing a 2. 91.01. Okay. So all of these numbers are just ratios of what the actual level of stuff was, dollar value wise, compared to the stuff measured in terms of this base year price. And now, what's the significance of that? Let's take year 4. If this is the prices, year 1, they were equal to each other. Tell me about what happened in year 4. Did this price thing go up or down? Up. Okay. Up by what percent? 3.5%. So that's one of the things that's kind of convenient of why we use 100, because then you just do simple subtraction and that gives you the percentage change. So what we're calculating is inflation, the rate of change of prices over time. The percentage change in the prices over time is inflation. And so now, by quickly looking at this, we can look at how prices have gone up. Prices have jumped 30% over this 3-year period. From 2003 to 2006, they've jumped 30%. All right, so we'll come back to thinking about these actual numbers. Let's get some of the details down. I think I'll start here just in case I need to add a few more columns or not. I'm not sure if I will. So first of all, the price level. The price level is a unitless number that reflects the average level of prices, relative to an arbitrarily chosen base year. Why did I throw this big word arbitrary? What does that mean? Doesn't matter. We can do this for any year. So I let you guys pick. Chelsea picked 3, but her and I didn't talk at all. It could have been 2004. It could have been 2005. And so it's important to remember that because we're always anchoring things back to that base year to see how prices have changed. Darren.
So the price level, is it written in a percent though? Or is that not?
No, it's at this level. So this is truly the level, and then I'll do the percent thing here in a sec.
Okay, so
yes.
it's not.
So this is truly the level of prices. A unitless number, it's not $100. It's not $103.50. It's just a unitless number that helps us compare one year to the base year or possibly 1 year to the next. Okay? So that's what the price level is. And then inflation, which I'm going to use the notation pi, which I know those of you who had me for micro, I use pi, I use for profits, but now it's macro class. So if I happen to be talking about profits, I'll write the word profits out. But inflation is the rate of change of the price level. The rate of change of the price level. So now that number is a percent, and it is the new number minus the old number divided by the old number, and then that little sneaky multiply times 100 to shift the decimal place over a couple spots. So I might ask you, what is inflation for 2004? Which I would note pi to the 2004. So then we just plug and chug into our formula. The new price level is the most recent one. If we're looking at 2004, then it would be the price level for 2004, 103.5, minus the old price level of 100, divided by the old price level of 100, times 100. Now I purposely picked that one so you can see it all collapse down into the difference. But here it is in all its glory. You could take 3.5 divided by 100, multiply it by 100, or you can simplify this thing out and the hundreds cancel out and it's just the difference between the two. But the answer, no matter how you get it, is 3.5%. Okay, just to make sure we're chugging okay here, let's do example number 2. What is inflation for 06? So take a couple minutes to work out 2006 inflation. I'll give you a hint, it's not 30%. First person with the correct answer, spit it out and you might get an extra credit point. 8.55. I do not have this worked out ahead of time, so we need a little backup. I see some heads nodding. 8.5. All right, so to calculate that, I want to introduce you to kind of the language of what might be underlying it. When I ask for inflation, without anything else being said otherwise, we're generally talking about it being an annual rate of inflation, 1 year. There is nothing wrong with another exam question or homework problem stating, what was the average change in prices? What was the inflation over this 3-year period, 2003 to 2006? Answer, 30%. New number minus old number divided by old number, go through that whole racket and you'll get 30%. But I asked the question being, what was it over this 3-year period? If I simply just say, what is the rate of inflation, you can assume that we're thinking about an annual change. And so you're just going to do a 1-year bump here of 130 minus 119.76 divided by 119.76 times 100. Hopefully you can work out your calculators. We had a couple head nods, comes out to 8.55%. Now, this brings up a little bit of hopefully helpful information on why you might look at different time periods. Over the 3-year time frame, we had a 30% jump. But in 06, it was only 8. If we simply averaged over those 3 years, it's about 10% a year. You with me? Right? If we take 30%, we say, oh, well, that was over 3 years, 10%. Or 30% divided by 10 gives me the average over those periods, right? 3 years, 30 divided by 3 equals 10. 10% on average. So 06, though, had 8.55, which probably means there must be another year that had a bigger jump. Probably this one, right? Somebody calculate this one. And if you want, you can just use 119 minus 103. What does that equal? How much? A little louder?
With those numbers,
yeah. 15.7. So 15% inflation for 05. Did other people get that? So my point is, what happens from year to year at the margin, at those little smaller increments, can tell a different story than what happened over a bigger time frame. And we saw that last time with the business cycle, right? The business cycle showed real GDP. I don't know if I put that. When we're talking about the business cycle, we're typically measuring real GDP, where real economic growth is. There's the ups and downs you guys talked about. Over time, the average rate of growth for the United States might have been this amount, a 3% growth. But what made that up? Well, we had 7% growth during this big expansion, and then we went in the crapper and went down to a negative 2%, right? So the devil's in the details of what went on in between. Don't be misled by the averages. That's how we start to have a little bit stronger critical thinking cap on. All right, questions, comments on that? All right, so I identified real growth. What was economic growth then? What was the formula for that? What variables are we looking at? Yeah, so if we're looking at real growth, which is probably the good one to have, we're going to look at the percentage change in real GDP. We could think of possibly, if it states it, what is nominal economic growth. That would be another variation where it would just be the percentage change in nominal GDP. But we've been now made aware that, hey, there's a price effect and a quantity effect going on with the nominal changes, so be careful. Just understand that that's happening. And so the inflation rate is the percentage change in the price level. And so that's really the dissection of all three. This is the combined effect. Here's the Q effect, the quantity effect that we really care about for economic growth. And here's the price effect, now called inflation. All right, so this is how the government goes about calculating two of the big variables that we're interested in. How the heck do they do it? So we've got some issues going on that make it a little difficult to do. So let's put types of price indices or indexes. You can, the plural goes either way. So we just learned how to create a price index. Tell me a price index that you've heard of in the news media. Somebody out of this class has heard of a price index, fairly popular one. You might even just know it by the acronym, which is fine. And I'll give you a hint. It's blank price index. Consumer, good. Consumer price index, the CPI. You might have heard that. That is a type of price index, the consumer price index, the CPI. There's also a producer price index. Now that we know the trick of how they create these, it's not that big of a deal. Heck, we could have a college tuition price index. We take all of the colleges in Kansas, or maybe the nation, and we just do what we just did here. We create a little basket of goods. We say tuition rates were this in 2001 through 2006. We can create a price index with anything, right? So producer price index looks at input prices. I forgot to put on here, the consumer price index looks at consumer products, which we're going to talk a little bit more about that one because that's the most popular. There's a wholesale price index. Which would be looking at wholesale prices for like Walmart buying stuff that they put on their shelves. So we got intermediate goods. Bottom line is we can create a price index for anything. The one that we just created, hypothetically, is called the GDP deflator. And sometimes just referred to as the deflator. That's the one we did that uses, instead of using just consumer products or just producer products or just wholesale products, hey, I got an idea. Why don't we use everything in the world or everything in our nation? All the dollar value of all final goods and services. So that's kind of the big granddaddy of them all that includes everything, the GDP deflator. So this uses all final goods and services. All right, so even in today's world with computers and supercomputers, and now there's super duper computers, do you think this is easy to calculate? The dollar value of all final goods and services? Is that a snap? It turns out not to be a snap. Maybe someday it'll be a snap, but there's no app out there that quickly calculates the dollar value of all final goods and services. There's still plenty of mom and pop shops on Ottawa Main Street right now that have a cash register ringing. They're giving product out the door. Dollars are coming in. They're not reporting any of that to the government now. Hopefully they're doing it eventually later. So eventually that data on the sales that they did gets reported to the state government or to the federal government. It might be on a quarterly basis. How long's a quarter? 3 months. So activity today, if mom and pop get that in on time, might be 3 months, might be 6 months. So there is a lag time on getting GDP data reported. Now, we want information now. What should I do today with my business? Well, is the economy in a recession or is the economy expanding? The truth of the matter? I don't know. The best economists in the world, guess what their answer is? I don't know. President Obama, guess what his answer is, if he's being truthful, which we expect him to be? I don't know. Nobody knows. You can't know. There's not enough information out there to actually know what it is. So economists spend hours and hours and hours and hours trying to come up with models to predict what that level is. But even their earliest time of getting the data out is typically 6 months in the future about what's going on today. That's getting trying to do as best they can. Of course, they're making predictions of what it is. But before we really start getting hard data in and knowing what it is, that might be 6 months into the future. So that creates a problem for the GDP deflator. So the GDP deflator has big lag times. Big lag times for getting, let's say, good data, good information. And again, this might be 6 to 12 months. So usually they'll come out with an estimate of what GDP is at the 6-month mark, and then they'll update that. At a future time, they'll say, oops, well, after making some corrections, the economy didn't grow by 3%, it grew by 2.8%. We screwed up. They probably didn't screw up, but they just didn't have enough information. They kind of had to fill a few gaps, and they weren't quite correct with how that shook out. All right, so the CPI then is the most widely used measure of inflation. The CPI is the most widely used measure of inflation. Okay, so the CPI focuses in on a basket of consumer goods. So instead of taking all goods, we're going to focus in on a basket of goods, a smaller subset of them. There's my basket. All right, so we're going to use a basket of goods that the typical consumer, the average Joe, if you will, that the typical consumer purchases in a year, but it can be broken down to the month and averaged out. All right, so here's what that basket looks like. 42% of it is housing. So that can be home prices, rents, other things. What's happening to housing prices? So the average person's affected pretty in a large way with housing changes. Another category, transportation. Transportation makes up 18% of our basket. All types of goods related to transportation. Could be bus fares, could be gasoline, could be car tires. Food and beverages is next on our list at 15%. Medical care for the average consumer makes up 6% of spending. Recreation is 6%. Recreation, 6%. Education and communication. So you guys are spending a little more than the average Joe probably, right? Now, education and communication, that is 5%. Then we kind of get into some miscellaneous other category. We'll have 4% of other. And then apparel, which would include some clothes, some jewelry, other types of apparel. Boots, socks, underwear, 4% into apparel. Okay, so there's literally thousands of goods in this basket, but these are the general categories, and they keep our shopping cart. I want you to really think about this being a basket or a shopping cart. Full of this stuff in that proportion is what we're tracking as we move through time. So one of the advantages to this system is that the Bureau of Labor Statistics collects this data monthly. So the Bureau of Labor Statistics is a government agency, the BLS, and they're responsible for collecting quite a bit of data on the population. So the BLS, Bureau of Labor Statistics, collects monthly data on prices of basket items. All right, so how do they collect prices? What do you think these government employees do to collect pricing information? How would you do it if you were charged with, okay, we've got this basket of goods, And we need to collect some information on prices. How would you do it? Survey. Okay, who are we surveying? Okay, so people, just go out to the consumers and ask them what the prices were. Okay, Mo?
Oh, well, never mind. Well, for the food, can't we, like, see, you know how you have those coupon cards? Can't we, like, look at all that data? What people are buying, how much it's costing, or no?
I'm not, what coupon cards?
Like, you know how you have, like, Albertson, you get the...
Oh, yeah, that
like
little thing.
Can you
Okay,
look
yeah,
at
that might be an interesting way to collect some data. Yeah. Okay, we could get some information on, give them your little grocery scanner thing. Okay, that's an interesting thought. What else? How else are we going to collect some data? Michael?
Wouldn't they see like gross spending over a month and then take it down into those categories?
How are they getting it, though? Are they talking to people? So we heard consumer survey. Maybe we can look at their grocery swipe card.
I mean, if it's labor like statistics, aren't they seeing how much?
No, that's just the name of the agency. Don't let that throw you. What my specific question is, they're going to collect monthly data on the prices of stuff that have been identified in this basket. So how would they get that information? So one of the things in the basket, for instance, is probably tomato soup, Campbell's tomato soup. How would they collect that information monthly on the soup? Go to the store. That's exactly what they do. It sounds so simple, right? So you get people who like shopping. You might think about a job with the BLS. That's all they do. They go into the store. They go to the Country Mart here. They come in with their computer. In the old days, they had a sheet of paper. But nowadays, I'm sure they're using an iPad or some other gizmo. And they're saying Campbell soup. What's this on the price? 74 cents. 0.74. Done. Ramen noodles. Bag of beans. Whatever. They go through and they essentially go shopping and record these prices every single month. Next month they come in and Campbell's soup says 75 cents, 0.75. Campbell's soup went up by a penny. Ramen noodles went down from $1.22 for a 12-pack to $1.19. $1.19. Every single, thousands and thousands of goods are simply being shopped for. They're going into real businesses and looking at the real price tag. They ignore sale prices and coupons and other things. What is the list price of the good? All right, so collects monthly data on prices of basket items. They go to stores. They go to stores and record the full retail price every month. So the lag time for the BLS is about a month. They go shopping during the month of February, and then at the end of March, everything's uploaded into this big database. They do the math. Of course, it's a computer cranking it out, but the same math that you guys just did, the nominal value of the basket, right? So they take that shopping cart. That was the price at the register that day. The real cost of the basket, fixing that price of tomato soup to what it was 2 years ago. And now we can see the relative change of the basket of goods over time. So the same technique we did earlier is exactly what goes on a monthly basis here. Yes?
So how do they measure things that are, not so easy, like education or medical care for an average Joe American?
So they're going to have a tuition at multiple schools in here that they can map out. So what is the full tuition rate for Ottawa? What is it today? What was it 5 years ago? They're mapping it monthly for that. So it's an average of all these things composing a basket of the typical consumer purchases. Darren?
What about just like do they do it for like each state? Because some states have way higher prices for.
Yes.
So it's state.
Yep.
Individually don't count.
State, and sometimes there's pricing data in the region. So the Kansas City metro area is thought of as an economic area that has some kind of boundaries to it. It might be multiple counties. They call them an MSA, a service area, a metropolitan service area. And so you've got county, sometimes city data. If you have a large city like New York or something, they can be collecting data right there. So we can have multiple levels of data collection across the nation. And so we can look at the inflation rate for Kansas, the Kansas CPI, which, like you say, might be much different than what's going on in Arizona. I'm sorry, what? Yes. Yep, it'd be a mix of private and public. All right, so that is kind of the data collection period that we have. Sometimes the basket changes over times, which can cause problems, right? So we're going to get into some issues with this technique. The things that are in our basket now are a little different than what was in there 10 years ago, let alone 20, 30 years ago. So we need to think about issues that might bias the CPI. So that's what we're going to look at next, are some biases. So one of the things that's biased about it, I've already hinted to. I said that they look at the full retail price. What is that going to miss out on if we're thinking about inflation? Sales, right? Coupons, other things are going to be overlooked. So if prices tend to go up by the list price, but businesses are consistently having a sale. Now, one of the businesses that I know is a big part of their business model, anybody shop at Kohl's? I just went there this weekend. My wife wanted to buy some boots, and she was tickled because they were 80% off. They were normally $100, and now they're $20. But did Kohl's ever have them at $100? No. Those of you who are Kohl's shoppers, you know darn well when a brand new product comes in their store, it's 20% off, right? So that's just the way they do business. And other businesses, of course, do business that way too. So sometimes that full retail price could be a little bit misleading. And so even though the full retail price hadn't changed on those boots that my wife bought this weekend, she bought them for $20. So the price level was looking constant or saying this much at the full retail price, but in reality, 6 months ago they were $80, then $60, then $50, and now they're at $20, right? And pretty soon they'll just give them away for $90 and get the inventory off their shelves. All right, so that's just one of the issues that the BLS has to struggle with the CPI. So let's just make a little heading here, some issues of accuracy with the CPI. So the first thing is that the CPI and the GDP deflator, which is everything again, the CPI and the GDP deflator will yield close but different estimations of the inflation rate. When GDP finally rolls in 6 months later, it reflects that there was one pair of boots bought from Kohl's for $20, right? GDP is the dollar value of all final goods and services that were actually purchased over the course of the year. So it kind of corrects for that discounting. So it does come to roost, which would tend to tell you then that the CPI, if we look at how it would be expected to be different to the GDP deflator, would it tend to be higher or lower? Would it tend to overestimate or underestimate the actual inflation rate. Over, good, right? So it's kind of giving a little bit too high of an inflation. And so here's what studies have found. A 1% upward bias. Let's just write this out and then we'll explain it. A 1% upward bias of inflation through the CPI. Let's just put, I'll just put this here as a little CPI inflation, for instance. A 1% upward bias of inflation leads to a 1% downward bias of real GDP growth. Economists generally agree, which doesn't happen all the time, generally agree the CPI has a upward bias. They've made attempts to correct this over time. This was first uncovered in 1996 that they thought it was about a 1% bias, which had some important implications on things in the society that we'll go over here in a sec. So first let's outline some reasons for that bias. So if you're biased towards something, what does it mean to use the word biased? You're favoring it. So you're favoring something one way or the other. In this case, we got an upward bias due to some reasons, and here's those reasons. So the sources of bias. Number one is a new goods bias. New goods bias. So right now we have MP3 and downloads replacing CDs. It's been kind of interesting over time since I was in your chairs 20 some years ago. I think whoever my econ teacher was at the time said, well, you know, we got cassette tapes replacing 8-tracks, right? And that replaced records. And so then we go from cassettes to CDs, and then there's always this continuous evolution of how we consume music. But if we're trying to then compare prices from 2013 to 1992 or 1982, we're not talking about the same good at all that's in there, right? So there's some issues that happen even in the short period of time as we're starting to look at CPI numbers moving through time. So new goods. Goods are replacing other goods. There's a quality bias. So we struggle with something like computers are a great example. Computers get better every year. There's some new innovation. So if you buy a desktop and last year's model was $1,500 and this year's model was $1,550, it very well might be 10 times better than the one that was $1,500 the previous year, right? So there's some issues with quality of, well, what is a computer? What is in that good? Again, in our basket, we're kind of just treating that as one thing, the laptop. Number three is substitution bias. So substitution bias, let me give you a little example. Suppose the basket has 3 pork and 4 chickens, chicken breasts in our little basket of goods. Now, if the price of chicken increases, what do consumers do at the grocery store with their basket when chicken prices go up? They buy, yes, as long as pork is staying the same, higher chicken prices means less chicken, more pork, right? There's a substitution that goes on in their shopping cart. The other white meat. I don't need as much chicken, I'll just make it up with some pork, since chicken's relatively more expensive. The basket, however, is fixed. And so the basket, the CPI basket, just says 4, 3, 4, 3, 4, 3. It doesn't take into account that substitution. So if the price of chicken increases, consumers actually, underline actually, buy more pork and less chicken. But, the big but here, the CPI basket stays fixed. But the CPI basket stays fixed. Our last one is outlet substitution. And this is where some changes have been made. But in general, they don't shop TJ Maxx. They shop the department stores and the retail places. So outlet substitution, so the BLS does not look at discount stores. They have started to change a little bit of that, but they don't go to Goodwill. They certainly don't go garage sailing and see, oh, well, you can pick up a pretty nice polo shirt for 50 cents, right? So there's other substitutions that go on that impact our purchases of goods. All right, we will pick up there on Wednesday.